I was in the living room when my phone rang. I remember that clearly because I'd just come in from the garage and my hands still smelled like motor oil, and I was thinking I needed to wash up before dinner. The television was on, some home renovation show she liked, and she was folded into the corner of the couch with a blanket over her lap, not really watching, just existing in that comfortable, half-present way she'd had for years. 41 years of marriage. You stop noticing after a while. That's the honest truth, and I'm not proud of it. The call was from my son-in-law. He's not a talker. Never has been. The man sends 2-sentence texts and considers that a full conversation, so when he called instead of texting, I already knew something was off before I even answered. Dad. He only calls me that when he's serious. You need to stay calm when I tell you this. I almost laughed. Nobody ever stays calm after someone says that. Where's Margaret? He asked. I looked through the doorway at the couch. Living room. Why? Silence on his end. The kind that has weight to it. That's not possible, he said. I'm looking at her right now. He works loss prevention for a regional hotel chain, the kind of job that requires him to monitor security feeds across 3 properties from a central office 40 miles away. I'd never really understood what he did until that moment. He told me he was reviewing footage from the downtown Harrington Hotel, the one near the convention center. Standard review of the previous evening's feed. And there she was, my wife, walking through the lobby at 7:14 the previous night, dressed in the navy blazer she'd told me was at the dry cleaners, holding the hand of a man he didn't recognize. I took screenshots, he said. The timestamp is right there in the corner. I stood in the hallway between the garage door and the kitchen. The motor oil smell was still on my hands. On the television, someone was choosing between 2 kitchen countertop samples. You're sure it's her? I said. It wasn't a question, not really. Dad, I've known her for 14 years. I told him I needed to call him back. I didn't call him back. Not for a while. Here is what I did instead. I walked to the kitchen sink and washed my hands slowly, working the soap between my fingers the way my own father used to, methodically, like cleanliness was something you had to earn. Through the pass-through above the sink, I could see the back of her head, the silver-gray hair she'd stopped coloring 3 years ago. I watched her reach for the remote and turn up the volume slightly. Normal. Completely normal. I thought about the previous evening. She'd told me her book club met on the 1st and 3rd Thursdays. She'd left around 6, said not to wait up. I hadn't. I'd watched the baseball game, fallen asleep on the couch, woke up when she came in around 10:30. She'd smell like the lavender handlotion she kept in her purse. She'd kissed me on the top of my head and said goodnight. 41 years. I knew that kiss, or I thought I did. I dried my hands. I pulled out my phone and looked at the screenshots my son-in-law had forwarded while we were still on the call. The quality was good. Hotel security cameras had gotten a lot better in the past decade. I found myself thinking absurdly, and the timestamp read 7:14 p.m., March 11th, yesterday. Book club. The woman in the footage was wearing Margaret's blazer, Margaret's reading glasses pushed up on her head the way Margaret always wore them as a headband when she wasn't reading, and she was walking with a familiarity, an ease that made my stomach tighten in a way I hadn't felt since I was a young man and a different kind of scared. I put my phone in my pocket. I went and sat in the armchair across from the couch. How was your day? I asked. She looked over at me and smiled. Same smile. Quiet. My hip's been bothering me. I didn't do much. How was book club last night? Good. Patty brought wine again. You know how she is. A small laugh. I nodded. I asked what they were reading. She told me. I don't remember what she said because I wasn't really listening. I was watching her hands, the way she held the remote, whether her eyes moved the way they always do when she's comfortable versus when she's manufacturing comfort. After 41 years, you know the difference, or you think you do. I went to bed early that night and lay in the dark for a long time. I want to be careful here about what I say, because I am 63 years old and I have learned, slowly, at real cost, that the stories we tell ourselves about the people we love are not always the same as the truth. I had built a version of my wife in my mind over 4 decades. I knew her food preferences and her fears, and the particular way she breathed when she was dreaming. I knew she hated the feel of wool against her skin, and that she cried every single time she watched a certain scene in a film from 1987 that I've now seen no fewer than 20 times. I knew she took her coffee with 1 sugar and a splash of cream, and that she had been lying about quitting smoking for the better part of 6 years, and I had made a quiet peace with that particular lie, because some lies are just someone's way of protecting the hope they have for themselves. But I had not seen her in that hotel lobby. I had not known about the man. The next morning, after she left for her Thursday aqua aerobics class, which I now sat with differently, that information, I called my son-in-law back. "How clear are the other frames?" I asked him. "Clear enough." "The man, can you make him out?" He could. He'd already run the guest list cross-referenced with the timestamp. The Harrington is the kind of mid-tier business hotel where the checkout process is digital, the record-keeping is thorough, and my son-in-law, for professional reasons, had access to more than the average person might. The room had been booked under a name that meant nothing to me. Checked in 2 days prior. Checked out the morning after. She was there for 2 hours and 40 minutes, he said. Then she left alone. I wrote the name down on the small notepad I keep by the telephone in the kitchen, the one we've had since the 90s, because I refused to give up the habit. I stared at it for a while. Then I called a man I used to work with, who now runs a small investigations firm out of an office park near the interstate. We'd worked together at the county assessor's office for 11 years before he retired early and reinvented himself. He was discreet, competent, and owed me a favor from a situation I will not detail here except to say that it involved a personnel file and a mistake that could have cost him significantly more than it did. He told me to give him 72 hours. I gave him 72 hours. During those 72 hours, I went about my life. I picked up the dry cleaning, the blazer was there, which meant she had 2 of them, or I'd picked it up at some point and I'd missed it. Or the dry cleaner story had been a fiction constructed well in advance. I cooked the Thursday pasta I always made on Thursdays. I watched television. I asked her how her hip was feeling. I listened to her talk about a neighbor's new fence that she found aesthetically objectionable. I was watching a performance. I just didn't know yet whether she was performing for me or whether I was performing for her or whether we had both. Somewhere along the way, started performing for each other and simply not noticed. On the 3rd night, I did something I'm not entirely comfortable admitting. I looked through her phone. I want to be clear that I had never done this before. We had been a couple that operated, I believed, on a foundation of mutual privacy, not secrecy, but the reasonable understanding that 2 people can share a life without surveilling each other constantly. I believed this as a principle. I still believe it, technically. But I was 63 years old and lying awake at 2 in the morning with a name on a notepad and a screenshot on my phone, and principles, I discovered, have a weight limit. The phone was on her nightstand. She was asleep. I took it to the bathroom. There were messages, not many, she'd been careful, or careful enough. But there were enough. The thread went back 4 months. The tone of it, the ease, the shorthand, the small references to things shared, told me this was not new in the way it felt, that there was a history behind what I was seeing that 4 months of texts only partially represented. I put the phone back. I went back to bed. I lay there until 6 a.m. when I got up and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the birds at the feeder she'd put up last spring. She'd been so pleased about that feeder. My investigator friend called the next morning with what he'd found. The man's name was unfamiliar to me. I'll call him what he was, which was a problem I now had to deal with. And he lived about 60 miles north in a suburb I associated with nothing except a hardware store I'd visited once in 2019. He was 58. Twice divorced. He and my wife had apparently met 18 months ago at a continuing education seminar for real estate professionals. She had gotten her license 4 years back. A project she'd taken on when our youngest left home. Something to keep her engaged, she'd said. 18 months. I thought about 18 months. I thought about what I had been doing for 18 months. I had been here. I had been making Thursday pasta and picking up dry cleaning and watching baseball and occasionally complaining about my knee and reading the newspaper on the porch in good weather. I had been, in every sense I could identify, present, and I had apparently been invisible. My investigator friend gave me the timeline he'd assembled, which was careful and thorough and more than I needed, but also exactly what I needed, and he did it with the particular gentleness that I imagine doctors use when they deliver news that changes the shape of someone's life. "What do you want to do with this?" he asked. I told him I didn't know yet. That was the truth. What I knew was that I couldn't continue the performance. I had been patient and methodical and careful, all the things I prided myself on being, and now I had the information I'd gone looking for, and it sat in me like something swallowed wrong. I called my daughter that afternoon. She knew something was wrong the moment she heard my voice. She's always been the perceptive one, and I told her I needed to talk, not over the phone, in person. She drove down that weekend. My son-in-law stayed home. I told her everything. She sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and she listened without interrupting, which cost her something, I could tell. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About a week." "And you've been, what, just living here with her?" "Yes." She looked at me the way she looked at me when she was a teenager, and I told her something she considered profoundly unacceptable. "Dad." "I wanted to know the full picture," I said, "before I did anything." She understood that. She was her father's daughter, for better and worse. We talked for a long time. Not about wouldn't answer. A voicemail meant she'd smell while I was in surgery for. A voicemail, which meant she'd miss when you stop looking carefully. The way a life can go one direction on the surface and another direction underneath, without the person standing right beside it, realizing. She cried a little. I didn't, not then. I'd already done that, alone, in my car, in a parking lot outside a grocery store, which is the particular kind of private falling apart that men of my generation tend to manage. She offered to stay. I told her I needed to do this part by myself. Margaret came home that evening from wherever she'd been. I hadn't asked, I'd stopped asking by then, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, not watching television, not reading, just sitting. She knew immediately. 41 years goes both directions. She set her purse on the counter, and she looked at me, and I watched her understand what was happening. "Sit down," I said. She sat. I didn't raise my voice. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters, not for any noble reason, but simply because it was true, and I am trying very hard to tell this exactly as it was. I laid out what I knew, the hotel footage, the phone, the investigator's timeline. I put it on the table, the way you present an audit, organized, complete, unemotional on the surface. She didn't deny it, I'll give her that. What she said, and I've turned this over many times since, was, "I didn't think you'd notice." I've thought about those 5 words more than anything else she said that evening, not because they were cruel, though they cut, but because somewhere underneath the hurt was the recognition that she might not have been entirely wrong, and that recognition was its own kind of reckoning. We talked for nearly 3 hours. It was not a good conversation. It was a necessary one. There were things said on both sides that were true, and some that were unfair, and some that were both simultaneously, which is how it usually goes when a long marriage finally arrives at the moment it has been quietly moving toward. She had not been happy for a long time. She said she'd tried to tell me in the ways she knew how, and that I had heard her, but not listened, and I sat with that, and I tried to be honest with myself about whether it was true. It was, not entirely, not simply, but there was enough truth in it that I couldn't dismiss it. None of it excused what she'd done. She didn't ask me to excuse it. That was something, I suppose. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later. It was not a dramatic process, which surprised me. After 41 years, I expected the legal dissolution of a marriage to feel like more, to have some ceremony to it, some weight that matched the weight of what was ending. Instead, it was paperwork and appointments and a mediator named something forgettable in a beige office with a potted plant that needed watering. The house is mine. We'd both agreed on that. She moved into an apartment in the same town. She didn't go to him, which I noticed, though I don't know entirely what to make of it. And we exist now in the particular proximity of 2 people who have not yet learned how to be strangers to each other. My son-in-law called me the week after she left. I wasn't sure what I expected from that call, awkwardness maybe, or an overly careful kind of kindness. Instead, he said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad I called you." I told him I was glad he had too. It's strange, the things you find yourself grateful for, not the marriage ending. I'm not grateful for that, not in the way people sometimes claim to be grateful for painful things, with that retroactive cheerfulness I've never trusted. But I'm grateful that I knew, that I didn't spend another 5 years living in a version of my life that wasn't real. I still make pasta on Thursdays, old habit. The house is quieter than I expected, and louder in different ways than I'm used to. You notice sounds differently when you're the only one making them. The bird feeder is still on the porch. I've kept filling it. I don't know what that means exactly. Maybe nothing. Maybe it just means that some things outlast the context that created them, and you keep tending to them anyway because they're yours now. Whatever else has changed. I'm 63 years old. I've been wrong about things before. I've been wrong about big things. Things I was certain of, things I'd built habits and assumptions and whole decades around. The difference now is that I'm paying attention. That's the only thing I know for certain going forward. I'm paying close attention. And I suppose that's where you have to start. There's a bird feeder on my back porch that Margaret put up last spring. I still fill it every few days. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's just habit. Maybe it's that some things become yours regardless of how they arrived. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually costs a person to stop paying attention. Not the dramatic kind of inattention, not neglect in the obvious sense, but the quieter version. The kind where you're present in every room and absent in every conversation that matters. I was in that house for 41 years. I knew where the extra batteries were kept and which burner on the stove ran hot, and what she ordered at every restaurant we'd ever been to together. And somehow I missed the whole interior of her life for 18 months. That's not a small thing to sit with. I've never been a person who believed that bad outcomes happen simply because someone deserves them. Life is more complicated than that, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But I do believe, and I believe it more firmly now than I did a year ago, that the things we refuse to see have a way of making themselves visible, eventually. The question is only whether we're the ones who see them first, or whether we find out some other way. I found out some other way. Kevin called me, and a hotel security camera did what 41 years of shared living hadn't, which were show me clearly what was happening right next to me. I think about the kind of man I was in that marriage in its later years. I was reliable. I was steady. I paid the bills and kept the cars maintained and showed up for every family occasion and never raised my voice. I was, by most external measures, a good husband, but reliability isn't the same as presence, and steadiness isn't the same as engagement. And I had slowly, without meaning to, without noticing, become more of a feature of her life than a participant in it. She tried to tell me. I heard her. I didn't listen. What I've had to reckon with, in the month since I filed the paperwork and she moved her things out, is that wisdom isn't something you accumulate automatically just by living long enough. You have to actually look. You have to be willing to examine not just what the other person did wrong, but what you constructed around yourself that made it easy not to see. That takes a particular kind of honesty that I wasn't practiced in. I'm more practiced in it now, and the tuition was considerable. And then there's the matter of what you do after. That's where character actually lives, not in the crisis, but in the long, ordinary aftermath of it. I could have collapsed. I could have spent the year in bitterness, which would have been understandable and also completely useless. Instead, I got up every Thursday and made pasta. I kept filling the bird feeder. I called my daughter. I let Kevin's phone call, the one that broke something open, be the thing that also clarified something. Not all clarity is comfortable. Most of the useful kind isn't. I'm 63. I have time left to do this differently. I intend to use it.